Well, it's wonderful to be back here with you all. My husband Frog and I absolutely love Alpha. The first Alpha course we ran was together as university students in Oxford. And Nikki Gumbel sent us the tapes. You remember the cassettes that used to exist in the old days? And ever since then, in the churches we've been involved with and also seeing it all over the world, it's just such a privilege to be alive at this time, I think, when we have this amazing move of God and this extraordinarily easy opportunity, really, to bring friends and family to come and hear about Jesus. So thank you. It's great to be in this church as well. Carl and Nikki are dear friends and love this church and all that God is doing here. So if you have your Bibles, I'd love you to open them. We're going to be looking at this theme of speaking about Christ in today's world. And we're going to think around just really a couple of verses from 1 Peter chapter 3. And these verses, for anyone interested in evangelism, will be very familiar. But I just really want to anchor what we're going to talk about today in this passage. So I'll read it for us. 1 Peter 3, verse 15 and 16. In your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. So just keep that open on your lap if you have your Bible with you. Some of you will know a little bit of the story of my family, but I think one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about evangelism and being involved in evangelism is that my family historically were not Christians. My grandfather was a brilliant scientist, a very committed atheist. He happened to be working in East Germany when the Russians came and occupied. And my father was born there. And my grandfather realized that all the elite scientists were being moved by the Russians to Siberia. And he thought, I don't want to live in Siberia. So he made contact with the British, and they sent a small aeroplane to come and get my father's family out and bring them to the UK. One day, they were told, my dad was about 6, they were told, we're going to this airfield, but we've got to pretend we're going to the zoo if anyone stops us. And they left everything they knew, everything they owned. They closed the front door on their house and went to this small airfield and came to the UK. My father grew up then here in Britain, but in a home where his parents forbade him or his sister to have a Bible in the house. It was absolutely forbidden to speak about God. So my dad went on to pursue an academic career, and he ended up teaching in a university in Australia, in the University of New South Wales near Sydney. And my mum and dad were living there. They were really happily married in their mid-30s. They had 2 fantastic children, a great lifestyle, wonderful beaches very near them, intellectual fulfillment in what they were doing. My dad was often on TV, so he had some degree of success in his career. Nice house, happy life, really. And a thought began to occur to him. And the thought was, when I get to the age of 65 and I look back on my life, what will I be able to say my life has been about? And that thought worried him. He thought, what I'm doing and living at the moment is great, but is there more? A colleague took him to hear a Christian giving a talk in the university aimed at students, but they went as 2 lecturers together and they sat at the back. And my father heard this man talking about the resurrection of Jesus, probably some of the material that is very familiar to us who love the Alpha course in the Who is Jesus talk. And he was just staggered that there might be any evidence for God. For him, belief in God was all about wish fulfillment. It was about culture. You just believe it because your grandparents have believed it and your parents believed it. Or, it was for kind of needy people who had maybe a bit of psychological imbalance, and God helped them out. And it staggered him that there might be evidence for God. Then about 3 weeks later, he was at home. My sister and I were asleep. My mother was asleep. And he was just in his study marking some exam papers of his students. So there was no crescendo of music. There was no emotionalism at all. He was just doing his job. And Jesus Christ broke into that room. My dad saw his life flash before him over the course of a couple of hours. And he saw the different scenarios of his life replayed before his eyes. And as he saw each situation which he'd thought and said and done various things, he saw the reaction to his life on the face of Jesus. I said to him, Dad, how did you know it was Jesus? He had no Christian cultural heritage at all. He said, I don't know. All I can tell you is I knew this was Jesus. At the end of the vision, he saw Christ on the cross and experienced this extraordinary love flowing to him, and he found himself on his knees. And he thought, I need to say something right now, but what do I say? He didn't have a language for religion at all, and so he just said the words that came into his mind, which were, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. They may be familiar to us, but they weren't to him. And so he became a Christian. He went in and woke my mother up and said, Jane, the most fantastic thing's happened. I've become a Christian. And she was not excited at all. She didn't like this idea at all. A few days later, my father thought, how could I meet other people who also know Jesus and have experienced his love? And he thought for a while, and then a light went on. He thought maybe church might be the place to go. So he said to my mum, I'm too embarrassed to go on my own. Please, will you come with me? Now, my mother had had a very traditional British upbringing. She'd gone to boarding school. She'd been at school chapel every day. And it had been enough to inoculise her, to immunise her against really the gospel. So she said, she thought to herself, I know my husband is intelligent. I know how I can cure him of Christianity. So she said, okay, I'll come to church with you, but only if it's Anglican, thinking, once he's experienced that, he'll be cured for life. He'll be fine. I can say this as a vicar's daughter and a vicar's wife, so I love the dear Church of England now, but over the course of 6 months, they really argued. My mum didn't believe at all. My dad used to sit her down and try and evangelise her, and he'd say, Jane, the thing is that you're in darkness and you need to come into the light. And you're like a lost sheep. You are a sheep and you need to be found. And this didn't connect with her at all. It didn't really work. My father also wrote letters to lots of people in the days before email, to tell them what had happened in his life. And as children, we began to realise that something very significant had changed. Issues like anger that had been visible in our family life began to change as the person of Jesus worked in our father. It's an amazing thing to be a family member when someone becomes a Christian. Anyway, he wrote lots of letters to people, telling them what had happened, but also wanting to encourage them to consider Christ. And one letter was to a colleague who was teaching abroad, and this gentleman came to visit when he returned to Australia, came to our house for supper. And he said, I was so excited to get your letter, because 3 months before you became a Christian, I became a Christian. And in my church, they told us that we should start praying for 10 people, and you were one of my 10. But before I told you about Jesus, you wrote and told me about Jesus. And it was actually that friend that led my mother to Christ. Isn't it wonderful? There's nothing more wonderful than seeing someone turn to the Lord, to come to know Jesus, to experience that transition from darkness to light, to be born again, as Jesus calls it. So as we look at these few verses together in 1 Peter chapter 3, I just want to share with you really some insights from this passage, but also from my experience of how this works in today's world. How do we go about speaking about Christ and seeing people come to know him? And obviously the Alpha course is a massive part of that. And in my experience, and I think we see it in this passage, there's a kind of two-way energy. There's a pull and there's a push. And we've all experienced this probably in our Christian lives, where we find ourselves, without really doing very much, pulled, drawn into opportunities that the Holy Spirit has organised for us to step into. But there's also a dynamic at work that we're called to, which is to push out, to step out as well. And as we go through life, we'll go through different seasons of life, different experiences, sometimes when things may be terribly easy. Everywhere we go, people are just dropping like flies. They're coming to know the Lord left, right, and centre. Everywhere we go, conversations are happening. And then other seasons when things are tougher. So we're going to look at some of the practical ways in which this happens. So the first thing we see from the passage is that undergirding this life of speaking about Christ, of making him known, is this really important principle. In your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. This dimension of being pulled into opportunity tends to happen to people who do this. It tends to happen to a certain kind of person. It tends to happen to people who pray. And it tends to happen in our lives when we pray. Have you noticed that? When we're fervent in prayer, when we're spending time with the Lord, when we're setting Christ apart, prioritizing him, amazing coincidences begin to happen, as J. John puts it. A lot of coincidences do seem to happen to people who pray. It may be that he brings someone to our mind as we're in his presence. Frog and I moved about 2 years ago, into a new house. And we've been involved in planting a church, which was a very new experience for us. Previously, he'd been a vicar of a church which had really grown, but we'd actually started with about 150 people. This time round, we started with 8 of us in our sitting room in a context where we knew nobody. We had no natural sort of contact with people, apart from through our children's school, etc. And so we moved into this house and we just began to pray that the Lord would do his stuff, that he would work. We began to pray as people were brought to mind. And living next door to us was an elderly couple. And we invited them over for drinks. We got to know them a little bit, but it wasn't a particularly natural relationship. But they were on the prayer list. I can't say I was very faithful, but my husband's very faithful at these things. So we prayed for them. Then one morning, a parcel was delivered to our house for them. And I thought, must take the parcel round. But lots of things came up. I didn't do it. Days passed. And this parcel was sitting by the front door. And I thought, we are literally the world's most terrible neighbours. Here's this parcel 5 days later. It was our day off, we were exhausted, and we were going out to go for a walk in the countryside, and I saw the parcel and I thought, just sensed that urge from the Holy Spirit, now, you need to go now. So I said, Frog, you need to go now. I'll get the car ready. So he took them, I was too embarrassed to go because we'd been so terrible. So he took the parcel round. There was this dear lady at the door. And she completely broke down into tears on the front doorstep. She said, Frog, you are my miracle man. He said, well, I'm terribly sorry, but we're just actually bringing this parcel. I have no idea what you mean. She said, last night my husband nearly died. In fact, I thought he had died. The ambulance was coming, and I haven't prayed for 60 years. She said, do you remember we came for drinks at your house and you mentioned this church and you invited us to church and we told you, no, we're not churchgoers at all. In fact, we've never been. She said, that conversation came into my mind, and as my husband lay dying, I knelt down and I cried out to God, God, if you're there, please send Frog round in the morning and get him to tell me how we can come to know you. So her husband had been moved to the hospice, and so Frog went to visit him and was able to lead this old man who'd never been to church, never read the Bible, to lead him to Christ. That's the pull. That's what Peter's talking about. He says, set apart Christ in your heart, pray, do the stuff, spend time with Jesus. And when you do that, opportunities will come, things will happen. Set apart Christ in your hearts as Lord. Radiate the person of Jesus in your day-to-day life. The implication of this passage is that for us as Christians, just as we live, as we speak to people, as we work, that other people will notice that there's something different about us. It says, set apart Christ in your hearts as Lord, and always be prepared when people ask you, what's the reason for the hope? Why are you different? So it begins with prayer, but there's this tangible sense in the New Testament vision of what it means to live the Christian life. That for you and I who love Jesus, who know Jesus, there will be evidence of that in our lives. And people will be stirred, caused to ask questions. This can happen instantly, or it can happen over a period of time. Maybe that people notice absolutely nothing or remain firmly tight-lipped about anything they've noticed. And then eventually, at some moment, it comes tumbling out that they've been touched in some way. It can be very rare in Britain today to have a close friend who's a Christian. I think that's one of the things that shocked me most moving out of central London. We're just on the outskirts of London. But I would say 90% of the friends that I've made, mostly through my children's school and tennis club, for 90% of them, Frog and I are the only Christians they know personally. And they actually can't believe he's a vicar and I'm a whatever I am. You know, they sort of look up on the internet and try and define what my job is, listen to talks and things. It's rare for loads of people in our country to know a Christian. How powerful then if you and I are doing what Peter says, setting apart Christ as Lord. So Jesus his presence goes with us as we go. He's in us and he's flowing out of us. He's just pouring out of every pore in our body. He's inspiring us to speak. He's giving us the words so that people pull. They want to know, why is it? What is it that's different about you? And we know this isn't a work of man. This is only something that he can do as we walk more deeply with him. When my twins, I've got one of my twins here today with me, traveling here to come and take notes and just spend time together. He's called Elijah. When they first started school, I never forget talking to a mother in the changing room on the first day of their school. And I was quite stressed out. They were my oldest children going to school, and we were in this new place. I didn't know anybody, and I'm sure I was not radiating Christ whatsoever. But about 4 days later, we were at a party, and she came right up to me. Someone had told her that I was a Christian. Gossip spreads. And she came right up to me, and she said, "There's something different about you, and I want to know what it is. Some people call it an aura. And someone told me you're a Christian. What is it that's so different?" We'd probably met for 3 minutes and the rumour mill had begun. That was it. That's the pull. Now, I do this very inadequately, and I'm sure we all feel that, but the vision of the New Testament Christian life is that the way we live and the presence of Christ in us and through us will cause people to question, will cause people to wonder. Notice that, so that's the first thing is pray, second is radiate Christ. The third thing is notice the personal dimension in this verse. You know, often people who are interested in apologetics, which just really means giving answers to people's questions about the Christian faith. People who are interested in evangelism, often we can tend to be driven by ideas or driven by results. And so there's a temptation to think, you know, let's get the box ticked, let's get the bums on the seats, let's get the people through, let's make sure they are believing and thinking the right things. It's, primarily propositional. But notice here, the heartbeat of this is that it's all about the person of Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth. And that's one of the things I love about Alpha. It's all about people meeting Jesus. The foundation for this kind of life that will pull questions is, yes, praying, it's radiating the presence and power of Christ, but it's knowing Christ personally, person to person, that Jesus is real, and you know that you know him. His love is real. It is not theoretical. Jesus is present. He's not just in the past. That knowing Jesus is crucial and central. This is not just a peripheral add-on to my life. You know, I've got a nice house, I've got a great job, I've got a lovely family, and I've got Jesus tacked on the side who makes me that little bit happier. No, knowing him is at the center of who I am. And knowing that he's changed me, that he's speaking to me, that he's forgiven me. There's a dynamic relational element to this. So evangelism isn't primarily propagating an idea or getting people to join a club called the church. It's all about people meeting Jesus. And as they do that, and as we do that, experiencing his light piercing our darkness, which, by the way, is absolutely nothing like religion, is it? You notice that? You notice how religion condemns people. People think, I can't do that whole list of things. Or many of my friends who think, well, you know, we love the cricket club and we love the rugby club, and you basically do the church club, but I'm not a person who does the church thing. I've had so many conversations recently along that line. The church thing would make me feel inferior, guilty, condemned, maybe a bit dirty, maybe a bit thick. I don't know what the rules are. I don't know, you know, how I would dress or why I would be there at all. Knowing Jesus is nothing like that. Knowing Jesus is meeting a person who becomes the closest, most intimate friend, who transforms us, who forgives us. How radically different from what the world thinks. Come to Jesus and experience powerful reality. When Frog and I were in our 20s, we moved from Oxford to Peckham, which is in the inner city in London, and we ran a church there called All Saints. Well, he ran it and I helped. And in the first year, a really lovely lady became a Christian through Alpha. At this point, I was 27 and she was 28. But other than that, we had very little in common. She had 5 children, and none of the fathers had stuck around to help her at all or supported her in any way. She was living in a small flat, and she had 5 children to look after, ranging from 2 years in age up to 15, and various ex-partners and 3 dogs. You know, just incredible level of responsibility. Anyway, she was gloriously converted. She came to know Jesus through doing Alpha, and she and I met up regularly, and I used to go to her flat to talk and pray and read the Bible together. I remember the first time I arrived at her flat, and I was quite scared. I was new to the area, and so I was quite frightened by various elements of actually getting there, but arrived and was sitting down and just began to talk, and we were going to do, I think, reading John's Gospel or something, but before we did that, she said, Amy, I've just got to share something with you. I came to know Jesus at Alpha this week. She said, I thought, and my friends thought, when I was coming to a church thing, that I was sort of going to be told off and that I would feel worse about myself. But through meeting Jesus, I feel like I've been cleaned on the inside. It's like I've had a shower on the inside. And I feel totally, she tried to search for the word, and I said, forgiven. She said, that's the word. Coming to know Jesus is the most wonderful thing. And then she said, now I don't know what you think about this, but I have this strange sense that Jesus wants me to marry this person. I've never been married. I've never thought about being married. But this person that I'm living with, who's the father figure to my children, I have this feeling that Jesus wants me to marry him. Why do you think that might be? It was so wonderful. There was no condemnation. There's no, you're living in sin. The person of Jesus meeting people is so different to what religion does. Then fourthly, Peter says, set apart Christ as Lord. So pray, radiate Christ. Know him personally. This is Jesus. This is not set apart the idea of Christianity or set apart the Bible or the creeds or whatever it is. This is set apart Jesus Christ as Lord in your hearts. And then be prepared to answer those who ask you. Be ready, be prepared, be able to engage with the questions that people might ask you. Why do you believe in God? What about the Bible? Can we really trust it? How can there be a God who loves us when there's all this evil and suffering in the world? Is Jesus really the only way to God? Be prepared, Peter says, to give an apologia. That word just in Greek meant a defense. It's what a lawyer would do in a trial. A lawyer charged with giving the speech for the defense in Greek culture was called on to give the apologia. That's all it means. It means to speak persuasively. It means to speak in a way that engages with probably the questions and difficulties the jury might have about the person on trial and what happened. It means to explain what did happen in a way that's coherent. Be ready to engage with the questions of our generation. Last June, I had the privilege of being involved in a school mission. I don't really do much schools work. I sometimes go and speak in a chapel or something, a one-off thing. But it had been arranged in a school quite near to Oxford that we could come in with a team and do a week of events. And the history in this school was that there had been 3 Christians who thought we'd really love for our school to come to know the Lord, and we need to get together and do something about it. So that they had begun to meet within 6 months. That 3 had become 30, and they ran a youth alpha themselves in their school. And then they invited me and a team to come in and to address some of the questions that their friends had. Is there really a God? And if so, does he care? And is there evidence for this? As we engaged with their questions, I was staggered by how profound their questions were, how heartfelt, as well as how thought through, and how surprised they were that their questions were taken seriously, and that there might actually be some answers. You know, I gave them 5 reasons to believe in God: cosmological, the fact that there's a universe, something rather than nothing; metaphysical, the fact that things that are not material, like thought and love, things that can't be tested in a test tube, are nonetheless real, are evidence for a personal God, that he put them there. We didn't just come from physics and chemistry. The moral argument, the idea that without God, we don't have categories to discern between good and evil. And let me tell you, a 14-year-old living in Britain today knows that evil is a reality. And that's not just on the streets of Peckham. That's in all our communities. They know that personally. Many of them have been violated by others. Many have seen things that you would never wish for your child to see or experience. And how does God fit in with that? Historical reasons, some of the evidences for Jesus. It was wonderful in that week of mission to see 93 people, 92 children, and the RE teacher make a commitment to Christ that week. Now, praise the Lord, that's nothing to do with individuals involved. It was just this passage at work. Take the life, the presence, the person of Jesus in the life of the believer and be ready to deal with some of the questions they might have. That's a little bit about the pull. Now quickly the push. Time is against me. Peter says, do this with gentleness and respect. Really, the first half of the verse is all reactive, apart from the setting apart Christ as Lord. You know, we react to other people's reaction to Jesus in us. And that's what New Testament Christianity is like. People are going to see Jesus in you. They're going to notice something different. It will cause them to ask a question, and you need to be ready to react. But then he says, do this, related to giving an answer for the reason for the hope. In other words, preaching the gospel. Do this with gentleness and respect. This is something of the push. We don't just react to the pull. We also need to put ourselves out there, to speak about Christ, to see, as Jesus said at the end of Matthew's gospel, to take the gospel to the ends of the earth and to make disciples. And again, the foundation, how do we do this? Well, the foundation, of course, is prayer. Prayer for opportunities, prayer for breakthrough, prayer with perseverance. The second thing, I think, is to do something that Jesus did a lot. And we're just going to touch on a couple of examples. And that is to ask people questions. One of the most powerful things about Alpha is that people don't feel preached at. They're able to engage with others in community. Well, in the New Testament, in the Gospels, Jesus operated very much like that. He asked over 157 questions in the 4 Gospels. I think this is a way that we can step out a bit in pushing, not ramming the gospel down people's throats, but asking questions that create that opportunity, that context for the Holy Spirit to work. Asking questions does lots of things. It can connect with people's desire for meaning. It can intrigue. We see Jesus doing this in John chapter 1, verse 38. The first time he speaks in John's gospel, he asks a question. He says, "What is it that you want? What do you want?" That's an amazing question. And I've tried using it in the last 2 years in all sorts of social situations. What do you really want in life? What is your life for? What is it that you're going after? Of course, we know Jesus promised, "I'm the bread of life." He's the one who satisfies the human heart. Asking a question can intrigue. Secondly, asking a question can help our friends start thinking about Christ. You know, in the church and at these conferences, we're thinking about Jesus and how we get the gospel out all the time. The vast majority of people in Britain hardly think about God at all. So actually, getting a person to begin to think, to begin to consider, is a huge step. One of my colleagues, a guy called Vince, became a Christian at Princeton University through starting to think about it. He studied philosophy there. And he began to find he was being asked all sorts of questions. He met Christians who invited him to an event, and he saw them singing to an unseen God. This guy was an all-star athlete, and he just couldn't believe that people were singing to an invisible reality. But as he began to think, Christ broke in. A question can bring the focus onto Jesus. Have you ever been in a situation where you're talking to someone and you're trying to invite them to Alpha, or you're trying to have a meaningful conversation, and it just keeps going off on a tangent. It keeps going on to evolution or whatever it is, whatever the bugbear of the person is. Asking a question can help bring that focus onto Jesus. I experienced this just a couple of weeks ago. I was having coffee with a friend, and we were having that conversation about how clearly church is my club that I like to go to, and she likes to go to the cricket club with her children, and how we're just not church people. And then we began to talk about how her mother had died, and she opened up a little bit about it. And so in that context, I just asked a very simple question. What do you think about when you hear the word or the name Jesus? Does that mean anything to you? And does Jesus have any relevance to this whole area of life and death? The whole course of the conversation changed. Asking a question, Jesus did it 157 times, remember? Asking a question can help define issues. It can show our empathy. It can show our love by asking the right question. One of my friend's husband was killed at work in a helicopter accident. And she talked about how, obviously, the grief was absolutely horrific, but how one of the worst things about going through that experience was that people went completely deathly silent. No one spoke to her because no one knew what to say. Now, we all feel that probably in the face of grief. What does Jesus do when he sees Martha, her brother has died, Lazarus, his best friend, or one of his best friends? Jesus asks a question. Where have you laid him? Think about the empathy, the compassion, the love in that simple question. A question can unpack, it can dig into motive. A few years ago now, a couple of years ago, I was asked to do some speaking in Washington. And we were doing a mission at one of the universities, and the organisers also got together an event at Capitol Hill for the people who work in the Senate and the Congress there. And they were going to do a free lunch, and I was going to do a short talk and then just answer people's questions off the back of the talk. And they said, we would like you to speak on the subject of, is Christianity a failed hope? Has Christianity basically failed? I thought that was the most bizarre thing to be asked to speak about. And I said, are you sure? Are you sure that's what people are asking? They're working with people in their 20s and 30s, predominantly the staffers in that context, who are running the US government pretty much. They said, well, we're hoping that we'll get between 30 and 40. That's what we've usually had at these events. We've never had more than 70, I think. And so I said, great, fine, I'll try and speak on that. The night before the event, I got a call saying, actually, we're moving it into the main debating room because we have 319 RSVPs. Clearly, American young people do want to know this question. Has Christianity failed? That question went to the heart of what they were asking. It was wonderful to see people beginning to respond. So we pray as we push, we ask questions as we push. And then lastly, I think we need to believe the Lord to break through in people's lives personally. We believe that Jesus Christ wants to and will break through in people's lives, not just intellectually, but also experientially and personally. In June, I was in Singapore speaking at a church service. They'd asked me to talk about the person of Jesus and invite people to respond. It was a guest service. And about 3 minutes before the service started, the pastor came to me and said, listen, we may have a really important guest coming. Just make sure whatever you do, you don't change your message. So I said, well, okay, but who's the important guest? I'm worried now. He said, don't worry about it. Just don't change the message. I said, well, you have worried me now, so who is it? So he said, well, it may be that we have the Grand Imam of, and he named a particular country, which is a very significant Islamic power. He said before him, his father was the Grand Mufti, and they have over 50,000 worshippers a day in the mosque. He might be coming to church, but don't change your message. So as a blonde woman in gold shoes, I felt the least equipped person to preach the gospel culturally appropriately. But anyway, this gentleman did come with his entourage, and it was an unbelievable experience to meet him and talk. He invited me to come actually and preach the same message in his mosque, which we'll see about whether that happens. But I was asking, why come to church? And the story came out that 7 years earlier, this gentleman's wife had been diagnosed with cancer. There's a very small Christian minority in their country. They'd heard about this because he's the Muslim leader. The Christian leaders had come, laid hands on her, prayed for her to be healed in the name of Jesus, and she'd been healed. And she knew that Jesus had done it. Praise the Lord. Jesus wants to work personally and powerfully. And unsurprisingly, when this gentleman was invited by a friend who's a businessman, no one else had ever invited him to church. When this friend invited him to church, he said, yes, I want to be there. So as we push, we believe for the Lord to break through in people's lives. Why don't we stand? And we're going to have a few moments of ministry and just response.